An ordinary public business meeting of the College Historical Society took place on the 7th of October 2009 with Professor Joseph Stiglitz in the chair. The debate was about the evils of globalisation, so naturally we'd got in an unemployed American economist to do the job for 40% less than an Irish professor would have charged. It was actually only the fear of a strongly worded letter from the SU that stopped us subcontracting it out for a 14-year-old Bangladeshi for €4.50. Jean Akeson opened the debate by fessing up to being a market pessimist. She likes to hang around Moore Street wearing all black, going, "Have you got any pomegranates? Don't even answer, I already know you don't." Niall Sherry proudly extolled the benefits of cultural and political globalisation because Kim Jong-il wouldn't be like such a total jerk if he totally knew that he was being like those girls in Mean Girls. Let them eat Riverdance, that's what I say. I mentioned earlier that we couldn't afford an Irish economist for the debate, although it turned out that actually the EU is spending a decent chunk of its budget growing an economist mountain near Marseille, from which we took neoclassicist Professor Philip Lane and Marxist Dr. Kieran Allen. Now, you know, people on the outside of mainstream thought have been saying kind of similar things about who runs the international financial system for a while. Kieran told us that wealth was concentrated in the hands of a small family of globalisers who plot in their globalisation temple on the globalisation Sabbath with their big globalisation noses. Obviously, this was a little bit offensive, given that Professor Stiglitz was in the chair at the time. It kind of got me thinking that maybe the best way to reconcile them would be to, put them together in a sitcom where a Jewish economist finds out that his new flatmate is a Gentile. We would call it, like, he brew the coffee, I just make the tea. The guy next Torah.
Oh, God.
Shabbat's what I'm talking about. Leading off to the spin-off, where they go and become blues musicians, Talmuddy Waters. In Professor Stiglitz's speech from the chair, no injustice of the modern economy was spared a passing remark. He spoke off the cuff about Nana in a remark which Green TD later described as a drive-by shooting, although Deputy Cuff added that with the super premium shit they'd be dropping in the programme for government, all of Prop Joe's towers be going green, baby. There being no further business, that meeting adjourned.
Are there any objections to my signing these minutes as a true and accurate account of the last public business meeting?
Welcome to the debate tonight. The motion for tonight is that this House believes that the American dream is dead. In proposition, we have Dr. Geary, an American historian and lecturer at Trinity College, Dublin. In opposition, we have Dr. Barrett, senior lecturer in economics at Trinity College, Dublin as well. Fitzgerald, the Communications Director and former Chair of Democrats Abroad in Ireland. Chair, enjoy the debate.
All right. That, I'd like to call on the first proposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I came across an ad in preparing for this speech in Money magazine, an edition from 1991. It said that unemployment is lower in Switzerland, owning a home is easier in Australia, going to college is more likely in Canada, vacations are longer in Denmark, and crime rates are lower in England, but more dreams come true in America. And I read this ad 5 or 6 times looking for the sarcasm, and it turned out that there was none there. From my perspective, things like being employed, going to college or owning a home are quite significant to having my dreams come true, or at least to having my aims achieved. And I think that the problem with America is that they fail to realise that the function of government isn't to make the dreams of the few come true. It's to achieve the most possible good for the many, and that is not what's being achieved in America. It would be nice if you could do both, if you could have people's dreams come true and give everyone a basic level of achievement, but we haven't seen that. That's not the lives of real Americans. And I might get the point from the opposition that as long as people believe in the dream, as long as people dream the dream, it's still there. I can't comment on what individuals I don't know in a country I've never visited believe, What I can say is that as a national ideology, the American dream is twisted, is flawed, and is irrational, and is basically a pathetic masquerade for a set of values. But as first speaker, I think it's important that I kind of assess what the American dream is to try and lend some structure to the debate. Basically, I think the American dream started out with the idea of the myth of the West, of vast tracts of land where any man could go and seek his fortune. And from there, it crystallised into the idea that everyone has an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That the aim of America is that every person hands on a better legacy to their children than they received from their parents. And obviously, today, the idea of the American dream is embodied in the knowledge that a child born in the early 1960s to a black father and a white mother, before blacks even have a full entitlement to vote, can one day rise to be President of the United States. And that is inspiring, and Obama is a beacon of hope for a lot of people. But what we have to bear in mind is that there is one black man in the Oval Office, and there are several 100,000 black men in prison in America. 1 in 5 children, almost, are living in poverty, and despite the fact that they claim to have such a wealth of opportunity and the best universities in the world, the average school leaving age is 16. These are the people who are outside the bubble of the American dream. These are the people to whom the fantasy means nothing, and what they need is a country that works. And if this was simply a question, as I think the opposition will lead you to believe, of the American dream being a source of sunshine and bunnies, then yes, I possibly would say that let them have their dream, let them be positive, let people have their hope. But I don't think that that's the case. The reality is that what the American dream is a fixed ideology that influences public policy. It's not just a case of people's feelings, it's something that affects people's lives in an actively negative manner. The dream is dead because it's not just a dream, it's not just a set of values, it's something that is implemented in the most fundamental aspects of American public life, and it is doing harm to people. And how it does that is that the American dream is so concerned with this idea that people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, that it's not willing to give people any boots, that they're getting absolutely no basic level of support from their government. An example that I read about yesterday is that Obama, as a senator in Illinois, tried to pass a measure whereby preschool children living in disadvantaged circumstances would be given cereal and milk in the morning. And a Republican senator jumped up in arms against him because apparently this would crush the 5-year-old sense of self-reliance. That's rubbish. The situation is that a child who is hungry has less opportunity to succeed than a child who is not hungry. You don't have to bring any ideology, any notion of self-reliance into that. If we take it another step, while it's a very nice idea to say that anyone can reach the top, the reality in America is that the middle classes are struggling to send their children to university. Anyone below that has a pretty dramatic concrete ceiling that they cannot overcome. They cannot achieve anything that they want to. And it's still true that a person who does exactly what the American dream tells them, that spends their whole life working hard, can have that destroyed by the fact that they were unlucky, they got sick, and they were harmed by the American health system. The American dream, as far as I'm concerned, has become a gross parody of itself. It's reached the stage where it entrenches all that it claims to oppose by justifying denial of education, of healthcare, of childcare, of welfare, of all the different types of fares and cares on the basis that people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Furthermore, if you invert the American dream, it's downright cruel. Because if you say that any person who works hard and who plays by the rules can achieve a basic moderate level of success, what you necessarily imply is that any person who does not achieve that just isn't trying hard, just isn't working hard. Any of the 12% of Americans who live in poverty just aren't working, just aren't good enough. There's no chance that any of them have perhaps been failed by the system. They aren't working hard. If you have this notion so entrenched that a father has to pass on a better life to his children, then if he fails to send them to university because of the exorbitant costs, he has failed them, he hasn't worked hard enough, he hasn't done well enough. And if this is the best possible system of governing a country, then someone someone who perhaps thinks that there are more rational ways for America to work, is necessarily un-American. And for any of these people who are in unfortunate circumstances, why should we help them if they just haven't worked? Why should we help them if it's their own fault? They had this opportunity laid out in front of them. Why should we provide them with healthcare? Why should we provide them with welfare? What we call the American dream has turned into a cult of self-obsession that has swept away the empathy of a nation. It's the kind of mentality that allows you to say, if I have health insurance, who cares that other people are sick? If I've amassed my massive nest egg, what does it matter that my employees will end up going without pensions? And if I have an entitlement to defend myself, who cares about the thousands who are being killed by gun crime? The reality is that America is broken. A nation is more than just an ideology. It is a group of people living together, and those people are being failed. I don't think that we need to cleanse America, but I think it can grow, but I think that it has to cull this old dogma of the American dream. Perhaps it started out as something sensible. It is not that way anymore. It's something that in the name of giving people opportunity restricts their opportunity, and it just no longer makes sense. And so I move to propose.
People would like to speak towards the end of the debate, they can, in an impromptu manner, they can just put their name up to the front, and Kate will try and fit them in at the end.
And I'd like to thank the speaker for her comments and call upon the first opposition speaker, Kate Oliver.
Madam Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to stand before you tonight to oppose the motion that the American dream is dead, because I believe it's as strong as it ever was. Niamh has come and put before us this idea that, almost that there's a Secretary of Dream, and the Secretary of Dream is failing to, enact policies on the basis of the dream accurately. And I would say that in doing so, Niamh has fundamentally misread the situation. And I would say that the dream is certainly based in culture, but it's a pervasive idea, it's a pervasive ideology, as Niamh has said, but that it's a personal thing. It's a deeply personal thing that applies to people on a personal level rather than on a state-run level. It's about the people on the ground rather than the people in power. So first of all, what do I want to talk to you about? I'm going to break down into a couple of areas. First of all, I'm going to talk about how the American dream is enabled, what the American dream is based on, what the American dream is. And that's firstly history and secondly meritocracy. And finally, I'm going to talk about what the American dream is today, what the American dream describes now for people living in America and for people outside of America. So first of all, we have the idea of history, and the history of America is very different from the history of anywhere else. As Eddie has said, Europe, that's where they keep the history, because America doesn't really have very much history. 300 years ago, America, as we know it, didn't exist. And in Ireland, we're burdened by the weight of our history. We have a bitter internecine civil war. Before that, we have a revolution. Before that, we have 800 years of oppression. Before that, we have the beautiful and idealized civilization of the Celts. And in Europe, they have World War I, they have World War II, they have the 100 Years' War, they have all sorts of other little wars in between it. They have the Renaissance. In China, they have the Great Wall of China, they have Pasteur, they have Marco Polo, they have Mao, they have communism. But everyone in America has come from somewhere else, with one notable exception. Everyone in America is an immigrant. Everyone in America has come from outside America. And there is no feudal system to get over. There is no old nobility looking down on people with a sense of entitlement. No, thank you, Niamh. There's none of that. And yes, we have, your Native Americans, but they're qualified. Everything in America is qualified. You're Irish American, you're Italian American, you're Sino-American, you're a Native American. Everyone is coming from somewhere else, and that's what makes America different, because in America, it's not about where you're from, it's about where you're going. We've all reached this place together in the middle, and now what's next? Where are we going from here? And I would say that the American dream, it's not labelled Irish American, it's not labelled anything like that. It's just called American because it applies to everyone. It's generic. No, thank you. And it's something that everyone can hope for. It's something that everyone can aspire to. And it's something that everyone can achieve. So yes, there's this ethos, and this ethos exists today, and it existed then. It's an ethos of mobility, an ethos of fluidity, and an ethos of equality. This ethos informs and permeates the idea of the American dream, and it's pervasive. And as long as this ethos exists, I think the American dream will always exist, because it says that that there is the ability to move from where you were, that you're not stuck where you began, and that there's a different end in sight for you. Which brings me to the idea of meritocracy, because if you don't have to stay where you are and you can go somewhere else, well, how are you going to get there? And is someone else going to do it for you, or are you going to do it for you? And yes, in America we say you're going to do it for you, because in America it doesn't matter how blue your blood is or how black your skin is. It's about the... On a whim, no. It's about the content of your character. And it's about how hard that you are willing to work. And it says if you want to achieve, if you're determined to achieve, if you work harder, if you work faster, if you work better, if you work smarter than everyone else, no thank you. Your hard work and all your efforts will be recognised. And it says that, that just because, you're the son of Italian Americans, Giuseppe and Maria who own the pizza shop, it doesn't mean that you have to own a pizza shop when you get older. It means that you can be Al Pacino, or you can be Al Capone, or you can be Aladdin if you want to, and you're willing to work hard enough for it. The American system of meritocracy says that whatever you want, if you work hard enough, you can earn it. If you work hard enough, you can achieve it. And I think that this, no thank you, this is an inspirational idea, and I think that this is a difficult idea to remove, because it's so all-encompassing within the American society, and it's an inspirational idea. And it says, okay, well, if the system fails you, you don't necessarily fail you. That you have the power by yourself. It's an enabling idea, and an idea that says that people in themselves are enough. People can get themselves where they need to go. People don't need the help of other people, because people in themselves possess the qualities that they need to get where they're going. But then the question is, well, where are they going? And what are the rewards of all this hard work and this effort that you're expected to put into these things? Which brings me to what the new American dream is, what the American dream means nowadays. And I would say to you that the American dream has changed. It's not what it always was. It's not the American dream that crushed Willy Loman and Death of the Salesman. It used to be in the past that the American dream was sort of a uniform neighbourhood where, everyone lived in sort of white post-war houses with big Grecian columns and glossy lawns and sprinkling of well-behaved children and older children with postal routes. Because you can pay for your kids, but they want to earn it for themselves because they buy into the American dream. But that's the essence of that dream remains. We still believe that we still look for security, we still look for comfort, we still aspire to success, like Niamh said, life, liberty, in the pursuit of happiness. And that remains within the American dream. But certain things, certain context has changed this and made the picture rather different. And as Niamh mentioned, one of the big changes in that factor is Barack Obama, because Obama is an inspirational figure. And Niamh would like to discount the fact that, he's one person and, everyone else is in prison, so it's not really true that a black man can succeed, because on the basis of statistics, he's a blip, he's an anomaly. But I think that Obama speaks for a different kind of American dream. No thank you. Just like no one wants to be Donald Trump, no one wants to sleep with Donald Trump, the opposite is true for America. That we look at the Obamas, and there's something for everyone there, because they're literate, they're educated, they're successful, but they also care. There's heart there, and that's the change in the American dream, because people still want security, they still want comfort, and they still want to be safe, but they want success, but there's more to it now, because people also want to make a difference. And I think that this is a positive change in the American dream, and it's a positive statement for the future. And I think that, like Niamh said, maybe not everyone can be Obama, but I think that just because not everyone can be Obama doesn't mean that there's not a virtue in people believing in that there's no usefulness in believing in hope. I think that that's a positive thing, because firstly it encourages people to work hard in a successful society as one where people work hard, and I would say that cynicism helps no one. It's a poisonous, and it's not a virtue. It's a destructive and critical instinct, whereas hope in itself, you can say blind hope is dangerous, but I think hope inspires people and leads them to go on. So in conclusion, I just want to say that times are tough in America, but I think that the bleaker things are, the more hope shines more brightly in contrast, and that the American dream isn't supposed to be a mirror of society. That was never the function that it fulfilled. The function of the American dream is to show where society might go, where you yourself might go, all the positive things that might be stored up for you in the future. When times are tough, it just means that we have more to work for. It's just that there is more for us to aspire to. And things like food, drink, shelter, and security, those are what we need to live, but hope is what makes life worth living. Thank you very much.
Okay, the American dream is just that, a dream, a figment, something that doesn't actually exist. It may have at one stage in the past existed when everyone was a poor immigrant, everyone was relatively equal, they just come over on a ship, and they were in one of the most untapped continents of the world, there might have been an opportunity for anyone to do well. But now it's very different. Now it is just a lie that is continually told so to justify a little help for the poor and low taxes for the rich. I think Kate was right when she said that this debate is about merit. I think the opposition have to show, why don't the poor of America merit the same help that we give to people here? Why do the rich of America really merit their wealth? Do they actually deserve all the wealth they've got? I'm going to discuss this under three main points. Just that first of all, I think that the idea of wealth being of such value in this is silly. That wealth is a per measure of people's contribution to society. I'm going to talk about why the poor social mobility in the United States undermines that idea, the American dream's claims, and I'm going to talk about the nation state maybe a bit at the end. Okay, I think that wealth is a per measure to people's contribution to society. There are other things that people do that are important, like being part of their community and stuff like that isn't measured by the free market. When people have a child in Europe, they're always guaranteed to have lots and lots of maternity leave, because we that they're doing an important thing for society and people, and we think that they shouldn't be made lose their job or become impoverished because they're not going to get paid for the period that they're pregnant. And the extremes of capitalism, like I really can't. Like I was reading a statistic today that some CEOs earn 275 times the wage of their average worker. I find it easy to believe that the CEO is more useful than maybe the average worker, but not 275 times. I think we have to appreciate that they must be so the market measures what's useful for the market, but doesn't measure a person's value for society. And maybe those people deserve more money than it chooses to give. Okay, social mobility. Social mobility is, I think, it's quite poor in America. And I think it's the important question here, because, for an action to be deserved or merited, it must have been something that you did through a choice, a good or bad choice. And but the fact is that the main reason why probably many of us here, and why many of people in America, that they're rich or poor, it's because if their parents were rich or poor. The fact is that if you're born into a poor family, you will live in a bad neighbourhood, you'll get a bad education, and you probably won't go to university. If you in a second, if you're born in a good neighbourhood, you're going to go to a good school and go to a good university. Yes?
How is that any different to what exists in Ireland at the moment, which is that if you live in a poor neighbourhood and you're from a poor family, your chances are severely diminished in comparison to the person who lives in the middle class area? There's much more welfare here. We've got much better schools. We run schools better. The cost of university isn't nearly as exorbitantly high. I think the Barack Obama example is a good example. But he was able to get in do very well. He was able to, if he hadn't been able to afford university, he would get scholarships and be fine. But I think that to be very, very smart, you will be able to do well in America. But really, what it's about is the mediocre person. If you are when is someone who's grows up in a working class neighbourhood going to get the chance to be mediocre? It's not. If you're really smart, you're able to get all kinds of scholarships and stuff. But there's nothing if you're a mediocre person. And I think that's what it's about. The chance to be mediocre isn't there in America. No, thank you. So about the finally, I just 4 minutes 14 actually. I think that that people said that there's no hope without the American dream. And I don't see why the idea that once we get rid of the American dream, we can't think of a new dream. A dream based around the nation state, where we realise that actually a lot of the things that happen to us are due to us as a large society. That what I am is based on what Ireland is like. That we are a common unit rather than just lots of individual units. If someone is if someone is just poorly or well, there's the national idea that maybe that's a shame for Ireland for so many people to be unemployed, or we win in a football match, that's really good. Why can't that be the same kind of hope for America? Why do they always have to think that it has to come from the individual? Why can't we think why can't they realise that the poverty in America is part of their responsibility, and the successes of America are part of their responsibility? Because the people who build communities, who work very hard for those communities, who are willing to die for those communities if they are under threat. Why do we not realise that what we do is based partially on our community? And that's the thing we can build hope around, rather than this idea that everything has to be built around the individual, and it is only the individual that brings success or failure. So for these reasons, I say the American dream is dead, and I move to propose.
Thank the Speaker for his comments, and call upon the second opposition Speaker, John.
Ladies and gentlemen, hope lives on, the cause endures, the dream will never die. And this is true. Not only will it never die, it can never die, because it is a transcendent truth. That is what the American dream is. It is a hope born in the heart of all people, not just Americans. A dream that surmounts all others in its scope and its audacity. It isn't American alone. It's a dream of all people, anyone who values freedom and opportunity. I'll be asking 3 questions tonight. What is the American dream? Is the American dream realistic? And why does the proposition hate freedom? So let's begin with the first question. What is the American dream? It's a belief in success generated by hard work and dogged tenacity. It is an unwillingness to accept defeat and a knowledge that efforts bear sweet fruit. It is created by freedom and opportunity, and it is at its core an affirmation of capitalism. But most essentially, it is a belief that the struggle is the glory, and that the greater the climb to success, the greater is that glory. Now, is this realistic? Yes, it is. Though we would like to think that everyone can reach the top, we recognize that this isn't always the case, and this seems to be a problem that the proposition have, that if everyone can't be the best, then no one should be, and we think that this is stupid. No thank you. It is the American dream that has made America the most powerful, most influential nation in history because of how great that dream is. This is a dream that makes people aspire. Yes, I'll take you on this one.
If someone was crazy enough to measure greatness of a nation with something like arbitrary, like the happiness and welfare of its people, would you argue that America is still the greatest nation in the world?
Yes, I would. Because America is the greatest nation in the world. We have the most vibrant economy, the most powerful military, the most influential culture the world has ever known. And that, sir, is a fact. What the American dream promises is that if you work hard, do well, and do better than everyone else, you will succeed. No, thank you. And we recognize that this is a good thing. The people who do best should receive the best rewards. And that we of the opposition see as a good thing, whereas the proposition thinks, if you're mediocre, why should you not be treated like a mediocre person? It's not fair. But we say that's ridiculous. And I will take you on this one.
You're talking about hard work. What do you say to the woman who's starting her second shift in like a 7-Eleven for $6 an hour so that she can support her child's medical bills? She's working hard.
Okay, yeah, I understand your point. I'd say, good job, keep it up. Okay, on to my last point. Why does the proposition hate freedom? I don't know, but it sounded to me when I heard them speak that pretty much all I heard was communist, lefty, Bolshevism, centralization. That's all pretty much I heard. I mean, from Niamh, we heard the greatest good for the greatest many. Like, utilitarianism is BS, guys. Like, it's just nonsense. The only way to bring the greatest good to the greatest many is to allow the free market to do its work, because that's what it does, and that's what the American dream says. Yeah, go ahead.
It isn't just about reaching the top. Like, social mobility at any level is just as low in the USA as it is in Europe. Like, can the American dream actually... That
is not true. Sit down. Sit down. That is simply false, and I will not deign it with further response. The American dream, as was pointed out by Niamh, is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It doesn't guarantee you happiness. As long as you're trying, you've got the American dream. And we say that is a good thing. Niamh apparently says her solution is the state should fix everything, essentially. That handouts, because we don't have enough in America, that's why America isn't working. We say that's BS because your guys have a higher unemployment rate than we do. I mean, clearly it's not, the state is not the solution, and we say the state is evil. No, thank you. And now, on to Stephen. He said a lot of things. I'm going to address some of them. He talks about how there are no benefits for the poor, how there are no tax, and how there are such low taxes on the rich. We say there are very low taxes on the poor also, and because tax is theft, and Americans realize that, and we realize that the American dream consists of not being taxed up the ass, and so we say away with that. He says also that there's more to life than money, that there's maternity leave and stuff. We have a maternity leave in America in the first place, so that's kind of silly. But money helps a lot, and the American dream is the realization that, yes, you should strive for money, you should want money, and it's a good thing, because money helps determine your worth. It may not determine all your worth, but it certainly helps. He also says that CEOs make a lot of money. Maybe that's because they fulfill a very important job, not exactly 270 times more than the average worker. I'd say a CEO is probably worth as much as the market says he's worth, because the market pretty much determines everything, and because that's what the free market does. It's a good thing. Okay. We've talked about Obama a lot, and somehow the fact that he was able to succeed is an aberration. But we say that's nonsense, because lots of people get scholarships in America. In fact, scholarships are more prevalent there because universities and high schools recognize that people who are capable should be able to succeed, and they like giving them that opportunity. So we say that's nonsense, that somehow these people are being held down. If you're great, if you're intelligent, you will succeed. And that's the idea that, this idea of dangerous leveling that Stephen brought up, this idea that mediocre people shouldn't be forced to feel bad about being mediocre or accept that they're mediocre. But if you're mediocre, you're mediocre. And that's the point. Like, if you're great, you will do great things. If you're mediocre, you'll do mediocre things. And we think that is just a fact of life, and that the American dream doesn't guarantee you success. It guarantees you the opportunity to succeed. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that the American dream is awesome.
Thank the speaker for his comments. I call upon the third proposition speaker, Dr. Daniel Geary.
I'm not sure if we just witnessed a speech in favor of the opposition or a speech parodying the opposition position. Let me give you some historical perspective. Is the American dream, which I take to be the idea of offering social mobility and opportunity to individuals regardless of background, is that American dream dead? Maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe we should ask whether the American dream was ever alive. Because historically, the United States emerged as a nation based upon the genocidal expropriation of land from Native Americans and Mexicans as well, and on the enslavement of people from Africa. For such groups, it might be better to speak of an American nightmare rather than an American dream. I should also point out that for most of its history in the US, women have been legally and socially tied to the positions of men and barred from playing wider economic and political roles. So my first point would be that the American dream was only applicable to certain kinds of people and certain kinds of situations. If the American dream was ever a reality, perhaps that was most true during the mid-20th century, when more Americans than anywhere else in the world, many of these Americans, children or grandchildren of immigrants, achieved middle-class status, which include ownership of homes, cars, televisions, and the like, the American dream. But their success was based on a particular economic and political climate that no longer exists, a climate that included high rates of unionization, which offered well-paid jobs to workers, and government programs that funded education and infrastructure associated with FDR's New Deal. Yes, go ahead.
Back the GI Bill again, then.
Well, that's what I was just going to go to, the GI Bill. So you've anticipated me here. Now, the GI Bill is a great example of government at this time providing opportunities. It provided to returning veterans opportunity to enter the middle class by giving them free university education, as well as no-interest loans in order to purchase homes. But the thing about the GI Bill, because it benefited veterans and not all Americans, it benefited men at the expense of women. In addition, since homosexuals were not allowed to serve in the Army, they also could not benefit from the GI Bill. And finally, because of segregation and discrimination, as well as the hostility of the government agency administering the program, black veterans benefited from this program far less than whites. So even at the great age of the American dream, many were excluded. Even so, you might say that the GI Bill did allow some Americans in the mid-20th century to experience that American dream of social mobility and home ownership. But is that still true today? According to Nobel Prize-winning economist Robert Samuelson, younger Americans, today's generation, are set to become the first generation of Americans to be less well off than their parents. No.
Can you name a successful or moderately successful society that didn't involve the exploitation of people at some point in its history?
Well, I think the question is not whether it involved exploitation at some point of its history, but whether that exploitation is ongoing and continues to be part of the historical structure of society. And I will get back to that point at the end of my speech. It is, of course, possible, and some would say with Obama that America has overcome this history, but I will argue that it has not. But now to my point about the fact that Americans will be less well off. This generation will be less well off, and I believe this is true. Samuelson says this is based on rising healthcare costs, which is indeed a major problem that faces the U.S. today. But I would attribute this primarily to the rising class inequalities in the U.S. due to recent decades of conservative government programs that have reversed the kind of government opportunities, the GI Bill and the like, that once made it possible for some Americans to ascend the class ladder, and by cutting taxes for the rich and cutting public services for the working and middle class. According to the Economic Policy Institute, a government think tank in Washington, D.C., the ratio of income of earners in the top 5% percentile in the U.S. to earners in the bottom 20 percentile went up from 11 in 1979, so if you're in the top 5%, you earned on average 11 times more than someone in the bottom 20%, to 19 in 1997, and the most recent data in 2005, 27 times as much. And in 2005, the top fifth of American wage earners held a larger share of income than everyone in the bottom 80%, and indeed, on a pre-tax basis, the top 1% of earners, with 18.1% of the total income, held a much larger share of income than the bottom 40% of households, which only received 12.5% of income. Now, in addition to political shifts that have magnified economic inequalities, the American economy itself has shifted from a high-wage industrial economy to a low-wage service economy. Earlier in the 20th century, Henry Ford of Ford Motors paid his workers the unheard wage of $5 a day because he wanted them to be able to buy his cars. Today, the emblematic American company is not Ford Motors, which paid high wages, but rather Walmart, which offers part-time, low-benefit, low-wage jobs and sells cheap goods produced no longer in America, but abroad. So many Americans today, if they want to buy homes, cars, and televisions, can only do so by going deeply into debt. What was once a nation of savers is now a nation where the annual saving rate every year are negative. The average household consumer debt, so that doesn't include mortgages, of Americans is $18,000 per year. Personal bankruptcy rates are skyrocketing and approaching an unheard of $2 million a year. And many Americans can afford homes only by buying exploitative subprime loans. Needless to say, Americans' addiction to debt was the principal cause of our recent economic meltdown. Now, what about education? This has come out before. And of course, education is important for social mobility. American universities were once the envy of the world, pioneers in developing a university system designed for the masses and not just the elites. But today, fewer and fewer Americans can afford education. The average cost for a private university, factoring accommodation and books along with tuition and fees, was over $33,000 a year in the US, and that adds up quickly. Over $50,000 at many top schools like Harvard, and $16,400 a year at a public university. The recent economic downturn has caused many states to cut educational funding, which are likely to see a dramatic increase in fees. This is in contrast, of course, to Europe, where either university education is free, as it is in Ireland, or much cheaper than it is in the US. And finally, to return to the point about Barack Obama, go ahead, I'll take it.
You say that the American universities used to be the envy of the world, but let's look at the top 100 universities in the world, and you'll see America fill the majority of those spaces. They're still the envy and still the best.
But if you see in the London Times, the Times Higher Education has just released its survey of top universities in the world, and American universities are indeed slipping, which has given rise to much anguished discussion in the US press about the declining status of American universities. So yes, they did have a high position, but their position is declining.
Is that not declining from being way better than everybody else to just way better than everybody else?
Well, there's a question. Of course, university rankings are based on a variety of indicators and don't actually include things like access. So if you want to talk about value for money, I don't think there's any question that European and other world universities would beat out American universities for. I mean, would you rather go to Trinity for free, or would you rather go to Harvard for $50,000 a year?
Most people in Trinity are middle-class people, just like they are in Harvard.
Well, even middle-class people would have difficulty affording $50,000 a year for 4 years. Now, let's return to the question of, the question about slavery in the U.S. is not, is whether this remains in effect in American society today. And no doubt Barack Obama is a very inspiring president and has a very inspiring personal story. But the question is, how representative is his experience? He himself was given opportunities that few Americans, let alone few African Americans, have. He attended an elite private high school in Hawaii and elite universities, including Harvard Law. But the situation of many African Americans is far less optimistic in the US today. And we need only think back to the images following Hurricane Katrina, when the poor residents of the mostly black Ninth Ward of New Orleans were abandoned by government institutions and left to deal with the catastrophic effects of a flood on their own. In 2004, the median income of black households in the US was roughly 60% that of whites. So that is far from equality. African Americans also were nearly 8 times more likely to be jailed than whites, and a shocking 12.5% of black men between the ages of 25 to 29 were in jail. Not had been in prison, but were in jail at that very moment. For many African Americans, the American dream has never been a reality, and for many other Americans, what possibilities there once existed of social mobility have sharply declined due to the political and economic shifts of the past decades.
Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, Auditor, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here. My invitation was rather late this afternoon. Somebody else dropped out. I haven't figured out who he is yet. But we had some premonition because on the way to College Chapel on Sunday morning, the door was open, so I dropped in, and my 11-year-old daughter was in the chair, and I was here calling upon the government to resign, and she was about to grade me. Then the committee came and said, could you please leave? We're doing rehearsals for the World Student Debating Competition in Turkey. So something must have told me it was a good time to do a bit of rehearsal in this very spot. I don't know what my 11-year-old daughter made out of it, but it was very nice to be here. It's always a pleasure to be here. This is a great society, the oldest student debating society in the world. And I think of Isaac Butt has an ugly bridge called after him over there, but he is Professor of Economics as well. From this society, great things will be produced. We'll draw around us the youthful talent of our country and train them in the power which may enable them to benefit her, the glory of days gone shall return with more than pristine splendour, I do believe the time will come when faction shall flee away and dissension shall be forgotten, when Ireland's orators and Ireland's statesmen will seek only their country's good, when law shall be respected and liberty maintained. This society is a superb gift from this college and from yourselves to every university in the world, and it's always an honour to be with you. What about the American dream? Well, in the preface, what Edward Albee says to the play is that it's an attack on the substitution of artificial values for real values, a condemnation of complacency, cruelty, emasculation, and vacuity. So that's what he wrote the American Dream play, to attack those. I think everybody would agree they're well worth attacking, and we should do so. Also a great person in this society, it was of course Edmund Burke, statue at front gate, and he was always attracted to what he saw from America. And we were talking earlier that with Dr. Geary that this is probably, he found, the most pro-American country he's ever been in, and I guess that's because of all those contexts. What attracted Edmund Burke was that it was the character of the Americans. A love of freedom is their predominating feature. They augur mismanagement at a distance. They snuff the approach of tyranny on every breeze. A fierce spirit of liberty has grown up. He was arguing on conciliation with America that the United Kingdom Parliament should have recognised this fantastic power emerging on the world stage. The connection, he said, is the close affection which grows from common names, from kindred blood, from similar privileges and equal protection. These are ties which are as light as air and as strong as links of iron. And that has developed. I know the opposition is pessimistic and so, but let's take Schwarzenegger, that a scrawny boy from Austria could become governor of California, he calls it, everybody else calls it California, but become the governor of California and should stand in Madison Square Garden to speak on behalf of the President of the United States. That is an immigrant's dream. It's the American dream. Martin Luther King, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of the creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And I think it is, as speakers on this side of the most have said, ladies and gentlemen, a fantastic development that we do have the first black president of the United States. The American dream is not dead. It was never more alive and never more vital. They have problems in the health service, but President Obama had a victory over that opposition last night. In 1948, Milton Friedman and Simon Kuznets, both of whom won the Nobel Prize in Economics, pointed out that if you allowed the American Medical Association to determine who could become a doctor, and by limiting places in American medical schools, and could control doctors coming from other countries to work in the United States, you would end up with a very expensive health service. Who emulated that? We did. The Irish health service is just as expensive and just as inefficient as the American one, but the attempts by our former auditor, Mary Harney, the first woman auditor of this society, to address the problem here have been frustrated by the medical profession, as were the previous attempts by Noel Brown, also a member of this society, to reform the Irish health service, were frustrated by the medical profession. He thought it was the church, but it was really the medical profession who did him in. We should have a 24-hour doctor in every 24-hour shop. At least President Obama has made some attempts to arrest it. We will be spending $18 billion from the public health budget this year, and another 4 or 5 on the private health budget. That, when you convert it into dollars and divide by 4 million people, is about the same as in the United States. So at least they're doing something to reform their health service. The best attempts of people like Noel Brown from this society, Mary Harney, auditor of this society, to reform the Irish health service, have been frustrated by the greed of people in the medical profession. Now let's also talk about the American dream for this country. The visa for Gerry Adams was extremely important. The attendance of Mrs. Clinton as Secretary of State in Stormont and here. When the Omagh occurred, President Clinton turned up in Omagh and in Armagh and in Belfast. I mean, this is a gift to us from America, which we've had from no other country. And it's interesting, these links go back far. I was in Hillsborough a while ago and I saw a sign on the wall, the Hillsborough Agreement. So I said, oh, what's up here? It was in fact that Thomas Jefferson and the Earl of Hillsborough were trying to do something in 1776. So these ties that the United States interventions, we know there have been mistakes in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, but look at the positive ones in Northern Ireland. Last week in Switzerland, with peace between Turkey and Armenia, and the attempts to achieve the same between Israel and Palestine. That is bringing the optimism, the energy, the enthusiasm of the United States. On the economic thing, good for the United States. They let Lehman Brothers go broke. We still have Sean Fitzpatrick and other gangsters walking around. Anglo-Irish Bank was a crime and nobody went to jail for it. Mr. Madoff was in jail, delighted, because he made off with a whole lot of other people's money. But we don't have bankers in jail. So I think there is an energy, an enthusiasm, an honesty and a justice in the United States, which is well worth emulating. The dream is not dead. As my colleague has said, the dream lives on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not about to sully Edmund Burke's name in this august chamber, you can be sure of that. But I will point out that at the time that Edmund Burke was exclaiming and extolling the virtues of America, well, America wasn't really formed in the way it is now. This society, by some measures, is older than the America that we know today. So to take his word about the American dream today might be a bit too soon. And just in relation to the healthcare point, I would just like to point out that if we are discussing healthcare, we really don't want to be comparing any healthcare system to the healthcare system that we have in Ireland to say it's good. I mean, most healthcare systems will do well by comparison with the Irish healthcare system. So we heard from John Engle an awful lot about transcendent truth and hard work and dogged tenacity and the struggle being the glory itself, the pursuit being the glory itself. And I'm here to tell you essentially why, and I'm quoting here, this is BS, after I talk to you just a little bit about Obama, because I think Obama has been brought up here and his name has been used in vain. Because I want to tell everyone to just, yeah, I know. So I want to tell everyone to stop. I want to tell everyone to just stop applauding America for Barack Obama, because I don't think that we're applauding the right people. Applaud President Obama and applaud the many men and women across many generations who voted or paid or fought or died to realise the possibility of a black president. But don't thank America. Don't fool yourselves into believing that it is sweet and beautiful and amazing thing that a black man can become president in the land of the free. Remind yourselves that it is morally repugnant that it was ever otherwise. You can think for as long as you want that America should be praised for electing its first black president, but you should actually think, you know, a little longer about why that's the case. The reason why we're praising America for the black president is because for so long there was this oppression. For so long there was this incredibly negative aspect. And that happens with a huge amount of the American culture. Like, I was expecting John Engle repeatedly to stand up here in front of you and say, we saved your asses in World War II, because that's what we always hear, like, let's face that. And you know, you can say that, it's a fair point to be made there. But anyone can respond to that by saying, yes, you did. You created an atomic bomb and dropped it on a civilian city in a country because they started it. And that's what stopped the Second World War. That happens with everything that America claims as its own. You have Martin Luther King, yes. You have Abraham Lincoln, yes. You have John F. Kennedy, yes. You also have all of the men that killed them. You know, America is both sides of everything. So I want to talk to you about both sides of the American dream, because we've heard fantastically from the proposition, and I would like to say, or from the opposition, I would like to say particularly Kate with her, come on, feed the children, it's going to be awesome. No, thank you. We have heard all of the rhetoric about the American dream, all of the amazing things about the American dream. But I want to talk to you about what happens between the rhetoric and the reality. And again, I say this particularly in the context of America, because America is very strange about its rhetoric to reality situation. I mean, I'm just going to take two examples. They're both pretty big examples that you might have heard something about. One is called the American Constitution, and the other is called the Geneva Convention. So to take the American Constitution, if you read over the American Constitution and you read over the Bill of Rights, you can see quite clearly the spirit and the ethos that was driving this nation. You can see that they were trying to defend the minorities, they were trying to defend people's right to discuss things and trying to defend people's right to debate and move forward in life. But things like the Bill for Freedom of Speech and freedom to bear arms and all of these things have been manipulated over the last centuries. Not manipulated in a way that you would think, but manipulated in that the spirit of the Constitution has been nailed down to the words that describe it. That it's been brought in front of justices and it's been brought by all of the people and talked about for so long that it's now only the words. So you have a system, no thank you, you have a system where these same bills are used to defend a man who is no longer on parole buying a semi-automatic rifle that can be advertised as being fingerprint resistant. Like that movement from the spirit and the soul of the American Constitution to what we see it being today is shocking. And the same thing happens with the Geneva Convention, where you have a clear spirit saying we will not torture, and yet you nail down the word torture to being, and this is paraphrasing but emulating what America eventually said over the last number of years, torture is pain associated or similar to organ failure, organ loss, or even death. Like that means that you can waterboard, that means that you can sleep deprive, and it means that you can put people in shipping containers and play inane children's music for hours at very large volumes, because that isn't torture. And the same two-sided rhetoric to reality has happened repeatedly with the American dream. Repeatedly. You have people saying, okay, I'll take it.
Just talk about the Constitution, say that we're set these particular words, but we have a Constitution that, take the 14th Amendment, the time that was written, citation there, that's been reinterpreted. The Constitution reinterpreted to allow abortion rights. This idea is that isn't true.
Well, it's not, I'm not saying that it's stagnant. I'm saying that it's been hammered down to something that is very different from what it was. And I would say that the fact that it's been reinterpreted so many times is more evidence to that fact. And in fact reflects that you are reinterpreting the words and not reinterpreting the spirit of the thing itself. And it's the spirit that I think we should be aiming for. And I certainly think it's that spirit and that's that dream that we talk about when we're talking about the American dream. We like the American dream and we like what it stands for. But as Niamh said, what it's actually done is disguise a great number of facts, and it's prevented a great number of things. The more we can say congratulations to people like President Obama, congratulations for achieving the American dream, the less we have to say to Barack Obama, congratulations on overcoming massive racial tension, huge prejudice, and incredibly elitist education system. And the less we talk about those obstacles, the less that we do about those obstacles. The more we praise people for the struggle, rather than the actual glory, apparently. The more we praise people for the pursuit and for the hard work and the dogged tenacity, the more that you say the struggle is the glory, the less you do to aid people in their struggle. The more you say congratulations on the American dream, which is code for congratulations on escaping the clutches of poverty, the less you have to like tackle the poverty itself. The more you say the exception is so fantastic, the less you have to change the rule that most African American people born into poverty will not achieve anything like what Barack Obama has achieved. Jane,
if minorities have no opportunity in America, then why are so many people from Mexico, from various other poor countries trying to get in there?
I'm not saying that minorities have no ability to work through the ranks. I'm saying that you have to have a number of things in your favour, not just hard work, not just dogged tenacity. You also have to have intelligence, charm, and a whole lot of luck. You know, you have to have all of these things. I would also say that the main reason why people are flowing to America is because they, think that they will have higher, higher wages and better, all of these better things. But that's not necessarily saying that those things will wait there. And this is what I'm getting at. Because the people in America, the people who are meant to be believing the American dream, now each know someone. Now everyone knows someone who is, like I said to John Engle, who is working their second shift in 7-Eleven for $6 an hour in order to pay for their child's medical bills. Everyone knows someone like that woman or knows of someone like that woman. You'd have to be some kind of blind not to. And in this day and age, you can't say then, hard work will always be rewarded, because it's just insulting and it's just not true. And the more people talk about the American dream, and the more people say it's amazing, and the more people say the struggle is the glory, so don't help people in their struggle because then they can't become glorious. The more people who say self-reliance is amazing, so don't try and help people because, self-reliance is what we want to reward. The more people like that are found in these dire situations. And the more people who are found in those dire situations, the more the American dream is killed. Because everyone who knows those people has to recognise the fact that the American dream is killed. And just because its ghost and its spectre haunts the halls of justice and the chambers of government doesn't mean that we have to believe it as well. You should take a facade off the American dream. It is dead, we should bury it, and we should move on. I beg to propose.
Madam Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I have a couple of problems with, how to talk about this, because I don't. There's a bit of a kind of a. If this room was one big brain, there's a bit of a cognitive dissonance going on between the proposition and the opposition. Because the proposition are saying, look at America right now, look at America and what it says it wants to be. Therefore, it has not achieved what it wants to be, therefore the dream has failed, therefore the dream is dead. And the other side of the debate is saying, well, okay, they haven't achieved what they said they wanted to, but what they say they want to do is really, really nice or awesome. Like the hot dogs. And I was thinking to myself, and I asked the speaker here on the proposition, he was talking about how America was built on exploitation and how this kind of chimes uncomfortably with the dream of all men are created equal. And he said, well, okay, fine, pretty much all countries are based on exploitation. So that bit of his speech was, I don't know why that was relevant, but then, America exploits people today. I can't think of any society that doesn't exploit people, where there aren't poor people, where there aren't minorities, where there isn't some section of society that, no thanks, that is less well off and has less chance to be better well off than other parts of that society. I think that, one of the things I like about America is that they really like when people succeed, even if those people aren't themselves, because they think that could be me, or that could have been me if things had been a little different. No thanks. One of the things that I really don't like about being Irish is that we really don't like when other people are successful. We tend to call them fuckers. Because our belief is fine. Our belief is that they probably did something wrong to get there. And we heard all these things, and I thought that the last speaker dealt with it quite well, which was like, give out about America except Barack Obama. Because we had this idea that, people can't succeed except Barack Obama. And so, just to point out, you're not right in every case on the proposition. People can succeed. But, look at Germany. Germany is that kind of very stable, solid country that, did all those bad things and said, we're really sorry, and is trying to be really nice, and has dedicated themselves to making really, really, really good cars, and stuff like that. And they're trying to be really nice to people, apart from the 30 million Turkish people that don't have any rights in their country. So if you compare Turks in Germany, which is part of the EU, to blacks in America are doing better. Look at Ireland and the travelling community. No, thank you. Look at France and the North African community. Look at Australia and the Aborigines. Look at Canada and the Aborigines. Look at all of South America and the Aborigines. There is no perfect society. It doesn't exist. There is no... I don't understand how that is ever going to happen. All right? Hold on. I'm working on something here. I think that one of my things that I firmly believe is that if you have a group of people which you call a society and you organise them together to try and achieve something that is better than what those people could do by themselves, you need someone or some people in charge. And those people in charge will always be better off than the people who are not in charge. I don't see how that's ever going to be anything different. And another conceit of the proposition is that what they're doing is that they're taking a photograph of America at this moment in time, and they're saying America right now is bad. You can't take America at any one moment in time. If you'd taken America just after it elected JFK, or just after it had introduced the Great Society, if you'd taken America just after FDR had introduced all his reforms, compared to just before that. You see, the thing about America is that they have the ability and the willingness to elect George Bush and then go, shit, and elect Barack Obama. Fine. I think that the view that we've had on this side is that rather than things being interesting, and rather than interesting people being able to do interesting things, and not in a perfect way, and I understand America isn't perfect. I wish they had better healthcare, and I wish they had better schools, and I wish they had better social services, and I wish that black men weren't more likely to die or go to jail than they were to graduate from high school in America right now. But what they want on this side of the house is for everyone to go, right, why don't we just give up on what we want to do, what I want to do? And why don't we work in a bland way, in a bland life, for a kind of a bland, mediocre kind of lifestyle? Why don't we give up on our dreams and give up on those things that we want to do? If Barack Obama had grown up in Sweden, they would have told him to stop wanting to be president. That is ridiculous. That is completely and utterly ridiculous. I don't think that you can ever have a perfect society. So I think that a society that is capable of changing itself, a society that is built on an idea that it doesn't matter where you come from, that you believe in the idea that if you work, that is worthwhile. That if we work together, we can make it better, yes. But we should also try and make the best of what is happening now. That you shouldn't sacrifice yourself for this pipe dream of a future generation and a future perfect existence that actually will never exist. That's why I like America. That's why it's not dead. And that's why I live free, or I would rather die.
First, the proposition speaker is Colm Denny.
Secret for
Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, I was at some point several years ago subjected to a John Steinbeck book. And it's an experience I'll never forget, although I can't remember a lot of what happened. I would attribute most of that to John Steinbeck, not to me. But the one message that we got out of it, and which I put in my Leaving Cert paper that got me here, was that the American dream is a pipe dream. And that's generally where I'm going with this. Hopefully I'm going to answer some of the things Ross was complaining about the proposition doing. Broadly speaking, I'm going to talk to you about hope. I'm going to talk to you about this idea we've gotten from Kate about why America, the other Kate, not you, about why America is different and how it's America's uniqueness that allows the American dream to be possible. And then I'm going to talk to you about the idea that it creates hope. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about what I think it actually creates and what it actually does. So, Kate talked about history, and she talked about how, we in Europe, we're tied down by our history, by the ages of oppression. Incidentally, it was 700 years of oppression before 1916. We're counting the North for the 800 years, just for your information. And she talked about how it's different in America, that because they have no history or very little, and because they have this melting pot of civilization, that's how the American dream is possible. And that it's a land where it doesn't matter what your race or creed or anything like that, that you can rise in your own merit. I think that's demonstrably not true, but I accept that's the idea of the American dream. But I would ask to some extent, she talked about that's what makes the American dream possible. That you can do this, and this whole idea of God and the American dream. But I would ask, if the American dream, as we've been given it, is that you can rise on merit, and by working hard, maybe that was a different ideology in the 17th and 18th centuries. I don't think it's necessarily a different ideology to what the world has at the moment, what most countries in the world have. I don't think the fact that I live in Ireland and that I'm from Europe means that I don't have ambitions, that I don't have things that I'd like to achieve and things that I intend to work very hard to achieve. So I think you have to look slightly deeper into the idea of what it is the American dream is and how it creates hope, because we had hope already. They don't have a monopoly on that. So John and Kate, in fact, talked about meritocracy, and John talked about how if you're good and you work hard, you'll rise to the top. He also slightly misunderstood Stephen's idea of mediocre people staying in mediocre places. He said, if you're mediocre, you'll be in a mediocre job, and that's just, I think, and I wouldn't want to speak for Stephen, but I think Stephen might have been suggesting that if you're not incredibly talented and incredibly lucky, and you live in America, then you don't get to a mediocre job. You don't have any strong chance of getting to any position outside of the one you were born in. That's a metaphorical position, you would. But glad you followed. And this is the problem I have. I don't think it actually creates hope, because what we get in the end, when you look at what the American dream is the hope that if you're really, 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 really lucky, circumstances will work out in your favour, despite all of the evidence that they're not going to. I think that if it was something else, someone who waits for those kind of opportunities and bases their life around those opportunities will be called insane. That it isn't actually rational to wait for those opportunities. And we say, what the result of that is that actually what you do is or what the American dream does is it stifles hope. That people will work for something they cannot achieve. And I think, yeah, okay, that's usually a good thing. You should, all your dreams but one and all that. But I think that actually it's not a good thing when you ignore opportunities for the small break, looking out for the big break. I think that the clearest example I can think of for how this happens is the fact that the Republican Party in America isn't just voted for by, rich white guys. It's also voted for when it goes on the platform of, low tax for the rich. When it goes on platforms like that working class people will vote for it, not because those taxes will in any way benefit them, because they have this idea, this pipe dream that is the American dream, that it might not help them, but it'll help their children, or it'll help them when they succeed, when they get there. So they sell their present for a future they cannot possibly have. And by that action of selling their present, by that action of supporting ideas and working for things that they can't have, they ensure that they never will rise. Because it's not just the other option isn't just socialism. You can also say that actually if you work towards giving people a fair base in society, then you have meritocracy. Then you have the ability to rise above the station you were born in. And because the American dream doesn't do that, because it does exactly the opposite, I would urge you to support this motion.
Zavin, but that's perfectly fine.
Because you're a maiden speaker, you can accept maiden rights. What that basically is that no one's able to make a point of information. But usually when you waive those maiden rights, everybody gives you a round of applause, and it's generally considered to be pretty good.
So I'm going to waive my rights. I actually had no idea what I was agreeing to just now, but that's what most Americans do. They're very audacious, and they can sign to anything if you give them money or an applause. I'm going to submit my point of view to the panelists, to those in the Historical Society, to those in the audience, not out of my experience for debate or elocution, but simply because I am an American. America is not perfect. Now, this is a statement that would, give me a lot of trouble among my fellow Americans who are more audacious, or should I say more conservative than I am, and would cause them to say that I am un-American or socialist, for example. But in my mind, no one achieved the American dream as great as Eugene Victor Debs. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with this man, but he was the leader of the American Socialist Party of the 20th century. He ran for president 6 times, never won. His last election, he gained 12% of the vote, and promptly after, he was arrested under the Alien and Sedition Act in the first Red Scare in 1918. How this is an achievement of the American dream, I haven't quite thought of yet, but you'll excuse my naivete. The American dream manifests itself in many ways, and it's one that doesn't apply solely to Americans. It's an aspiration. It's a belief that through motivation, not necessarily only through hard work, but should I say a belief in a belief, that's sort of faulty, that you can move yourself, that you can, to use the cliche, pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. Pardon. There was Christopher Columbus, who had the dream of exploration and finding something. There was Martin Luther King, who believed that in the future, that one day, that people would truly live in equality, and that dream hasn't been achieved. And there were immigrants at the turn of the 20th century who were looking to better themselves and better the lives of their families in the future. And my argument would be, even though those individuals have ceased to be and passed on from existence, I would argue that the dream hasn't died for them, but has lived on in the individuals who have lived through them. Now, I think what's very important about the American dream is that it is a dream, and I don't think a dream is something that is necessarily fulfilled or real because it manifests itself. A dream is a dream because you believe in it, you live in it. And you can argue that there are thousands and millions of people who work tirelessly and endlessly and fruitlessly economically, and those who do not achieve the higher status economically, successfully, of the bankers who are corrupt and shipped off to prison like Bernie Madoff. But they still work because they believe in the dream. Now, I can't speak for every individual, but there is the underlying motivation that one day they will succeed. Now, whether or not they do, some do and some don't, and we could say those who do are the anomaly. But even still, there is the dream. Yes?
The fact that they work because of this dream is not a good thing. If they work and work and work, and it's all futile in the end, and they continue to work only because of this quixotic dream, then would it not be better to ditch it and start maybe asking for proper health care and proper education, proper schools for the lower classes?
Well, I'm not exactly sure that that's a valid distinction, because I believe that there are many who work under the dream who would petition themselves for the causes that you mentioned. And I certainly think that most people do not work solely for this illusory dream, but for financial support and for their children and to eventually better themselves, not just as a dream, but it is an underlying motivation that you could say that sustains the American society, sustains the American individual, and clearly has a global effect in that we're in Ireland and we're discussing the dream right now. And I think that is proof alone of its substance. Now, there are many who say it is dead, or it is alive, or it does not exist, or it never existed. But there is the discussion, and there is the belief, and in some sense, that gives it its own validity. Now, give me 1 second. Okay. I'll sort of make my closing point. As I said, I really have no experience at these things, and I don't really have a form except for a random page of notes. I'm going to argue from the American dream of Socrates. Only a bit chronologically flawed. He believed, and we can see this through Plato and Plato's dialogues, that there is an absolute good. And this is an absolute good, a virtue, that we can never perceive in society, and we will never attain in society, but we know it exists, and we work towards its existence because we do see manifestations of good everywhere. People working nobly, institutions that are working properly, economies that are flourishing, countries that are becoming democracies. I apologize. And in that respect, yes, America is flawed. Yes, other nations are flawed. Yes, there are flaws in the world. But I think the dream is alive and well. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. Thank you.
Because he's the first fresher maiden speaker, he has won himself an iPod Nano courtesy of Trinity.
I'd like to call on the next speaker for the proposition, Clare Hayes Brady.
You know, when I was a campus rep, I just kept all the free iPods. Madam Chair, Mr. Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. There's a high probability this will be a somewhat surreal speech. I have this many notes. We've heard a lot this evening from the proposition about how the American dream has become twisted and generally pretty evil, and as such, it has to be dead. And from the opposition that the fact that it's good in principle means that it's alive and kicking. As a literary theorist, I am going in grand tradition to propose a third reading. I propose to you that the American dream is in fact undead. I wish I were kidding. And I'm going to propose that on 3 grounds. That it is, in the style of the undead, unkillable. That it came from an Indian burial ground, which as we all know is where zombies come from. And that it is inexorably and implacably pulled between this world and the next. Yeah, I'm honestly not kidding. So before we begin, I'd like to just lay out what I think we're talking about when we're talking about the American dream, because people have been throwing around the phrase, and actually, I don't think anyone's really defined it that clearly. And the American dream is not Shangri-La, and it's not the Elysian Fields, although I was in America last week and I saw 2 places called the Shangri-La and the Elysian Fields, so. It doesn't offer success. It doesn't offer glory. It doesn't even guarantee opportunity. It guarantees that if you happen across opportunity, you will not be prevented from following it because of where you came from. That's it. It doesn't tell you that there are going to be sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows for all concerned. It is the guarantee that should you have the opportunity, should you come across the opportunity, you will be free to follow it. That's it. That's all I'm talking about. Unkillable. G.K. Chesterton said many years ago that America is the only country in the world that is founded on an ideal. That's no longer true, but it was true at the time. And what this means is that it's not the fact that other people have succeeded. It's not the fact that it's a promise of success. It's the very idea is what the American dream is founded on. It's what America is founded on. There is no common history in America. And it is, to all intents and purposes, or has at least been called, a country without a past. You're disagreeing with me there, but that's all right. I was on a Greyhound the other day. For all of you who haven't experienced it, you should endeavour to do so, but in daylight. I got talking, believe it or not. In fact,
on the way there, I got talking to a transgendered lesbian who'd been raised by a village of lesbians, which was pretty interesting. But on the way back, I was waylaid by a born-again Christian who was seeking to save my soul. You can't make this stuff up. So on the 5-hour bus journey, Sid, for that was his name, was explaining to me how I'm a sinner and I'm bound for hell and what have you. But what was more interesting to me was the fact that Sid was carrying a briefcase, and he was well-dressed, and he was well-spoken, and he was clearly well-educated. So I asked him where he was going. He was on a bus from Savannah, Georgia, to Dallas, Texas. That is a long journey. The reason that he was on the bus was that he and his wife had lost everything in the recent crash. They had had a mansion worth $1.5 million, which in Savannah is just astronomical. It's huge, it's palatial, it's unimaginably luxurious. They'd lost it. They have 4 kids. And Sid was on his way to Dallas to go back to trucking school. Now this, to me, says everything about the American dream. Sid has lost everything, literally everything. He's 62 years old. He's got no pension. He's got no health care. He's got nothing but what he can do for himself, what he can get out of this trucking business. Incidentally, has anybody ever tried to pull themselves up by their bootstraps? Any physicist in the world will tell you that that is just not possible. It's physically not possible. It breaks the laws of physics and cosmic law and natural law and really every kind of law. So the problem that I have with the American dream, and the reason that I propose to you that it is in fact undead, is it's an idea. And it's an idea with resonance for everybody, because we do like to think it's all going to work out. That's why we watch Disney films. We love Disney films, even though we're not cartoons. They're not realistic. An idea is naturally not realistic. So it's unkillable. An idea can't be killed. Oh, crap. So it's like a ghost. I'm going to go through this very quickly. Theodore Roosevelt, incidentally, made a speech on Manifest Destiny many, many years ago. I don't know the exact date, I'm afraid. Where he said, yes, we killed all the Indians. Yes, we buried them. Well, we didn't really bury them. We more threw, a little bit of dust over them. And we're very sorry about that. But imagine what would have happened if we had let America be the preserve of the savages. That's what he said. That was it. There is no shame in the fact, well, there should be shame, but there was no shame in the fact that America basically founded itself on an Indian burial ground. On a more serious note, I think the national obsession in America with horror, the horror genre, bespeaks a genuine national guilt at its history, and this attempt to ignore history, the fact that history will always, always, always come up and bite you in the ass. I'm going to have to move very quickly. America is also a vampire. It lasts for a very long time. It appears suddenly out of nowhere with no real backstory and sort of just fits in seamlessly, rampaging, raping, killing, and all that. I know I'm nearly finished. John Winthrop said, "We shall be as a city upon a hill, and the eyes of the world will look to us." That was really where I think the American dream started. America has this terrible inherent tension between wanting to be exceptional and wanting to be universal. It's an irreconcilable difference. It's pulling between Puritan values and cowboyism, basically. It's pulling between you will have your reward in the next world and you can make a buck fast. That, to me, is the central tension of the American dream. It's why it can't be killed. It's why it should be killed. It's not dead, really, although I should be arguing that it is dead. It is a rampaging, blood-sucking, flesh-eating, virus-ridden zombie that's walking around. It's got how many people in prison? It's got how many people living in utter, utter degradation and poverty? It's terrible. We're at a crisis point now, and the election of Barack Obama faces us with, I think, an opportunity, but also a great challenge. It's kill or cure in the next 4 years. So the American dream isn't dead yet, but it probably should be. Thank you.
And last speaker to sum up the opposition is James.
Madam Chairperson, ladies and gentlemen, freshers, bet you spoke before that guy, which is spoke before that guy with the iPod. What this debate is about, it's about the kind of society that we want to live in, the kind of aspirations that we have for our future and for our family and for ourselves in the present. It's about the actuality of society and about the potentiality. So what I want to talk today about is, firstly, what America has done, not only for itself, but for the world, and how comparing America to, for example, European countries is unfair on America itself because of the kind of how it has reached for the stars and brought everything to a whole new level that Europeans kind of get for free after America have reached there. I also want to talk about mobility in America, because I think there's been a lot of discussion about how everybody in America is really poor and there's no mobility, but without really any analysis of academic analysis of the reality in terms of mobility and in terms of immigration in America. And then I also want to talk, finally, about, not so much about what Obama brought to America by being the first black president, but more about the process of election and in America, and how they use the political system to bring such dramatic change and to progress in society. Because what the difference between America and other countries around the world is, it is about the difference between achieving like actual differences now and the belief that there's a potential for more. It's about this belief that every 8 years or so you can completely change your course and try and be different. So what we've seen in the last 8 years before Barack Obama was president was a certain policy, a certain governmental policy to try and achieve long-term growth or whatever. So when the American society decided that wasn't what was achieving their growth, they decided to go something absolutely different. They decided to go somewhere where unions would be back in the main ground, where healthcare would be prioritised, where various things like government programs would be expanded. So what we see in America, in the American dream, it's not so much about whether government is large or small, but it's about this idea that no matter what, they will look to the future and progress and have that attitude that success is in the long term is good. So what we say is on this side of the house, what we've been saying is that if you look over the last 50 years at what America has brought to the world, we say we've been criticising American healthcare throughout debate. What we don't see is that the best hospitals in America are better than anywhere else in the world. What we don't see is that all the medicine that is used all around the world is made in America. All the innovation for these products is made in America. Computers were made in America. The greatest arts, for example, in Hollywood, greatest movies, and a lot of the great art. Like America takes the center stage. Universities, America takes the center stage. In science and research, America takes the center stage. So when you compare, I'll take you in a second, Niamh. When you compare what Europe does in terms of getting the benefit of all these things, and having admittedly a different kind of society, a different kind of system that wants to reallocate resources to the needy, what we say is it's unfair to compare somebody that brings us so far while we take a step back and have a completely different model to help those. So go.
America's pretty cool if it's like arts and science, but can you deny that ancient Athens was exponentially better?
I don't think I can actually deny it. I'm trying to think of anything that ancient Athens did in terms of plays, but can't make a joke out of that at all. Okay, so what have we talked about in this debate? Well, we've basically said that America has lots of poor people, and they can't move up in the world. What we say is, if that was true, first of all, upward mobility in America wouldn't be at the same standard as it is around the world. Well, that's not true. In America, upward mobility, America has the highest levels of upward mobility relative to everywhere else in the world, and has done for the last 50 years. Even if policies of education policies in the last 10 years have become weaker relative to other countries, like America created the idea of free universal high school. It was the first country to properly expand primary education. So what we say is, yes, over the last 10 years, there was probably a shift, a drift in terms of making a better kind of society, but the kind of country that America is, the country that is constantly looking forward, constantly looking to the potential, has now elected a president who's going to take a completely different approach. And that's the kind of, it's not even that Obama will be right, it's that the idea that when something goes wrong, they will change what they're going to do. They will change their policies, and they will look forward. So on those grounds, I beg you to oppose this motion.
won the iPod. I've done this before, and God knows why I never go to the bathroom before I do this. So it's going to be quick, and I'm probably going to agree with a lot of what some people said and just make it sound a little bit simpler. From what I know, the first time the term the American dream or something along those lines was kind of used was it by a man, a historian and a writer called James Treslow Adams in a book called The Epic of America in 1931. And the quote was, "That dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for every man with opportunity for each according to his ability or achievement." I think I got confused, and I think some of the speakers got confused, and I think maybe some of the audience are a little confused. But that's okay, because that's part of the American dream. It struck me when one of the speakers, the second speaker, Kate, came up and said, you know, the thing about the American dream is that it's deeply personal. And it's nice that I get to sit in this chair because at least I can kind of go away from politics a little bit and maybe be a little bit personal, just for a bit. It would be a little bit silly of me to say the American dream is dead because I was brought up on it. It's very hard to get away from it if you are American, and each person has their own idea of what it is. And if some of them think that perhaps that is walking down the street and shooting people, that's obviously bad, but that doesn't mean that the American dream is that. I think everyone has their own idea of it, and I think in the beginning, maybe in 1931, and certainly in the 1950s and 1960s, when the American dream started becoming this popularized thing, and anybody who watches Mad Men will see a lot of this coming into it, that what started happening was advertising started trying to sell us the American dream. So what was before this kind of concept of, I'm going to be a simple person, and I'm just going to live, and I'm going to have a nice life, and I'm going to have a nice family, and I'm going to provide for my family in every way that I can. I reject the idea that I think was actually brought up in the opposition, that the American dream inherently is individualistic and leaves absolutely no space for any kind of community involvement or philanthropy. I think that's entrenched in every American. Whether we actually do it or not, whether it actually happens or not, whether we, you know, don't go and rape and pillage the rest of the world. Yes, America has flaws. We're still an incredibly young country, and yes, we can compare us to Athens, and no, we're not as awesome, but we're working on it. And that's what the American dream is, that we are working on it, and we're actually okay with the fact that we're not there, and we're also okay with the fact that someday we may never be there. So I suppose the personal aspect of it is, this reminded me of my father, who has decided to tell me that I have a quarter-life crisis, which is funny because he has a little midlife crisis going on, so the two of us are ready to kill each other. But he was dirt poor and from Kerry. And he decided he didn't want to be a civil servant. He was going to go live with his brother in Alaska and work on the pipeline and freeze his butt off for God knows how many hours. And then he was going to go travel around a little bit, maybe be a bellhop for a while, do a few other things. And then he decided, you know, I'd like to join the Air Force. So he did that, ended up with citizenship beforehand this all came in, and ended up with the GI Bill, and then he thought, I'm going to go to college, but I don't know what I want to do, I just want to learn things. And he went in and he actually talked to the dean and said, look, I don't really feel like declaring, and he said, well, listen, you have to. He said, I'm not going to. And eventually decided he wanted to do English, and that was that. My father's American dream seemed to be to find a blonde Californian woman, marry her, have some children, and move them back to Ireland. And that's why I'm here. But that is still an American dream. And it wasn't, I need to have so much money. And it wasn't, I need to be anything in particular. He had no idea what he wanted to be. But the idea behind that dream, which was in an Irish person, and it's funny to me that it wasn't even mentioned actually, or it was barely mentioned, that, you know, so many Irish had this dream. This is a dream that isn't American. This is a dream that's inherently human. That if so many people hadn't had it, in so many other countries and brought it over, and even brought it back to their own countries, then we wouldn't be talking about it today. Interestingly, and I have to bring it back to boring politics, in 2006, CNN did a poll where 54% of Americans said that the American dream is more unachievable than it ever has been, which is about the same as it was in 2003. I think Americans came under a lot of pressure when things were really, really good, because it wasn't just enough anymore to be okay or to, you know, improve on the last generation. They had to be astronomically better than the last generation. And a lot of that has to do with advertising and with the media and with Hollywood and with how much we were being told, you're great, but you could be so much better. And here's what happiness means in like 50 million different forms. And then we all got confused. And so when people started reaching the point in their lives when they were achieving more than they ever thought they would, and my father is a prime example, they start getting bored because they think, am I actually satisfied? Am I actually happy? And then they get wrapped up in, is happiness and satisfaction the same thing? Is satisfaction going to lead to laziness? Am I going to just stop? That's where I think all of us get to. And in the end, I think the recession for every country, but certainly for the States, is an opportunity to reflect on what happiness means to individual people. And, you know, are we happy with that banking job that makes us work ridiculous hours and we never see our family anymore, even though they're going to ridiculously great colleges? Would we be happier just starting up a little cafe somewhere? And, you know, if that's what you want to do, that's what you do. At the end of the day, the good thing about the American dream is that there's an awful lot based on personal responsibility. And I think that wasn't quite brought into it. And I think that's good. And I think it's something that Americans are told from a very, very early age, that no matter what you do, you're responsible for your own actions. And that's the good side of individual thinking. And so with that, I suppose I would say the American dream, like Claire said, it can't die because it's a dream. It just doesn't. And as long as there are people in this room who tell me that they went to Virginia for a little while, I mean, they had it. As long as there's people like my father who decided that he was going to have, you know, children who had a life that was better than his, that's always going to keep going. And the American dream could be said that it's just a human dream. And on that really, really ridiculously corny note, I'm just going to finish it there.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming to what I thought was a very stimulating event. Firstly, I'd just like to thank the guests. On the proposition, we had Dr. Daniel Geary. In opposition, an old friend of the Hist, Dr. Barrett. And in the chair, Fitzgerald. Next week's debate is that this House would legalise euthanasia. The debate will be beginning at the same time, at around 7:15, but beforehand, if people are interested in learning a bit more about debating, we'll be having workshops at 5 o'clock with Niamh Ní Mhaoileoin, and then we'll be going to the pub around 6. And if you want to get involved in the Hist, kind of just get to know people, we'll be having tea and toast next Wednesday at 11 o'clock. So there's a reception upstairs if anyone wants to go upstairs. So thank you.
give to the world.
I'm going to carry it.
Oh, sugar.